In November 1985, in Bear Brook State Park, New Hampshire, the discovery of two bodies in barrels sent shockwaves through the community. Years later, in 2000, a second barrel was found containing the remains of two other young girls. Investigators faced a web of misleading leads and false information that left them with few answers for almost 30 years. A man had preyed on vulnerable women and exploited their trust, which led to a tragic outcome. Who were these victims, and why did their heartbreaking stories remain hidden for so long? Let's jump right into it. Bear Brook State Park is a beautiful destination and covers over 10,000 acres and stands as the largest developed state park in New Hampshire. It is situated in the southeast and offers a perfect backdrop for outdoor activities like camping, hiking, biking, archery, swimming, and fishing. With 40 miles of tracks twisting through lush forests, visitors can walk around hidden marshes, serene swamps, and peaceful ponds. However, beneath its picturesque surface lies a darker story. In 1985, the peaceful woods of Bear Brook became the scene of a horrific discovery when someone found the remains of a woman and a child. In 1985, a group of friends were shocked when they were playing a game similar to hide and seek in Bear Brook State Park. 11-year-old Jesse Morgan and his friends found a slightly rusted, dark blue 55-gallon steel barrel with a piece of plastic poking out from beneath the lid. The kids were curious and they managed to loosen the lid, which released an odor resembling spoiled milk. When they couldn't open it any further, one of the boys kicked the barrel and the barrel fell to the ground. A white liquid dropped out and they mistook it for rotten milk and left the barrel in the woods. In November 1985, Officer Ron Montplizer of the Allenstown Police Department received a call from a hunter who believed he had found a barrel containing a dead body. Montplizer initially thought it might be a deceased pet or deer corpse because he was familiar with routine small-town call-outs. However, he encountered a decomposed human skull when he inspected the barrel. As the sole officer on duty, Montplizer summoned additional force members and deputized locals to secure the area. Jesse Morgan's father was among those deputized, and the Morgan family was stunned to recognize the barrel as the same one Jesse and his friends had played with months earlier. This discovery started a mystery that lasted for 30 years. The barrel held the remains of a woman and female child that were found nude, dismembered, and decomposed to partial skeletonization. Their bodies were wrapped in plastic and tied with electrical wire, which possibly dismembered for barrel confinement. Investigators estimated the bodies had been in the barrel for several months to years. The woman was believed to be in her 20s or early 30s at death, while the girl was estimated to be 8 to 10 years old. At the time, New Hampshire did not have its own office for medical examiners, so the remains were sent to Maine. It was believed the victims were a mother and daughter, and were estimated to have died sometime between 1977 and 1985. An examination of their skulls reveals that both had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head. Despite a thorough search, investigators found no clues due to the deteriorated state of the area, which included the remains of a store that had burned down in July 1983. Additionally, the surroundings were cluttered with an abandoned mobile home, a camper, and various rusted vehicles, barrels, and appliances, which made it even more difficult to gather any evidence. The New Hampshire State Police took charge of the investigation, while the Allenstown Police continued to gather information locally. At that time, forensic examination techniques were not as advanced as they are today. Despite an extensive investigation, this was the only information they could gather. While most murder investigations begin with police examining the lives of the victims, in the Bear Brook case, authorities didn't even know who the victims were. Working under the assumption that they were a mother and daughter, investigators sifted through missing persons reports and FBI records, hoping to find a match. However, their efforts yielded no results. It appeared that no one was searching for these individuals. Months passed with no significant leads. Investigators searched records for every elementary school in the state to find a match for the child victim, but this effort yielded no results. They then examined camping records for Bear Brook State Park and combined through 5 years' worth of data. Yet again, they found nothing. In 1986, the first composite sketches of the victims were created based on their skull structures. When these sketches were released to the public, the department received calls, but none led to breakthroughs. In 1987, less than 2 years after the bodies were found, state police decided to release the remains for burial. A small group of community members and journalists attended the ceremony, where a headstone was shown, which was donated by the community. The headstone read, "Here lie the mortal remains known only to God of a woman aged 23 to 33 and a girl aged 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care." With no leads to follow, the investigation stuck, and the case was set aside with many other unsolved homicides. Months turned into years, and for 15 years, there were no new developments. On May 9, 2000, the second barrel was also discovered, and it had partially skeletonized remains of 2 infant girls, among them one between 1 and 3 years old, and the other between 2 and 4. Like the victims in the first barrel, they had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head. Police believed that all 4 murders happened around the same time, even though investigators strangely missed the second barrel in 1985. They explained that it took so long to find the second barrel because it was located outside the initial crime scene area. John Cody was assigned to the Bear Brook cold case as a side project that was part of the major crime unit of state police. Intrigued by the details he had read, he felt compelled to visit the discovery site himself. Little did he know that his visit would reveal a shocking twist in a case that had puzzled investigators for years. As Cody explored the area, he widened his search beyond the original crime scene. Just 300 feet away from the first barrel, he stumbled upon another barrel, which was partially hidden by greenery and lying on its side next to a rock. It was identical to the first barrel. A feeling of dread came over him as he opened the barrel and discovered the remains of 2 more bodies. The New Hampshire State Police returned to Bear Brook State Park, and it felt strangely familiar. All had died with the same pattern, blunt force trauma to the head. In the initial phase of the investigation, authorities sought to raise awareness of the case across the U.S. and parts of Canada. They eliminated at least 10 potential identities, but despite numerous tips and leads, the victims remain unidentified. In June 2013, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, created updated facial reconstructions of the victims and utilized their dental records to enhance the accuracy of the images. Since details about their skin tones and eye colors were unknown, the reconstructions were presented in black and white. Unfortunately, after these efforts, there were still no significant leads to identify the victims. In 2014, police revealed that DNA testing showed the woman and the oldest and youngest girls were related through maternal ancestry. This suggests the woman could have been their mother, aunt, or older sister. However, by 2015, it was confirmed that she was indeed the mother of the 2 girls. Forensic evidence indicated that the woman and her children lived together in the northeastern United States for a period of 2 weeks to 3 months before their deaths. However, the other child, now known as the middle child due to her age, had no familial connection to the other 3, which prompted speculation that she could have been a stepchild or adopted. Detective Cody and his team accurately reviewed every piece of information related to the case, and they were hopeful that this second barrel would hold the key to solving the mystery. Once again, the situation mirrored the past. Even after thoroughly reviewing the same missing persons reports and FBI records that investigators had looked at in 1985, they encountered another dead end. It seemed almost unreal because they had 4 bodies and 2 barrels and still no leads. The case went cold and remained unsolved once again. The community was understandably frustrated. Many questioned the quality of the investigation back in 1985, especially since the second barrel had gone undiscovered for so long. Although the two barrels were close together, the thick forest and marshy conditions made it hard to search the area. The barrels were technically found on private land next to the park, but park visitors often mistakenly access this area. Some question whether the 1985 investigation was thorough or if the oversight resulted from difficult conditions. However, finding the second barrel back then likely wouldn't have changed much, as investigators still struggled to identify any victims. In the mid-1980s, New Hampshire averaged about 15 murders a year, which divided law enforcement into different cases. At one point, state police were handling two major cases, which were the Bear Brook Murders and the Paquette case. Some believe the Bear Brook investigation was overlooked in favor of the more sensational Paquette case, which had identifiable victims and suspects. Initially, there was hope for a quick resolution in the Paquette case, but it eventually went cold. Authorities initially thought the death of Danny Paquette was an accident, but in the early 2000s, a private investigator revealed discrepancies. It turned out that 17-year-old Eric Windhurst had shot Danny Paquette to avenge his friend Melanie, who had accused her stepfather of molestation. Windhurst was sentenced to 14 years in prison and released on parole in 2020, while Melanie received a shorter sentence despite claiming she hadn't asked Windhurst to act. Though the Paquette case took focus away from Bear Brook, its resolution renewed hope for that cold case. In 2015, advancements in forensic techniques breathed new life into the case. Scientists conducted radioisotope testing on the victim's bones and hair, which can reveal details about a person's environment based on the types of isotopes they absorb during their lives. Isotopes are atoms with either too few or too many neutrons, and different regions have distinct isotope profiles. Geologists use this testing to analyze rock samples, but it also provides surprising insights into organic life, as plants and animals take in isotopes through their diets, which are then stored in tissues like bones, hair, and teeth. George Cavana, a geologist from the University of Florida, analyzed the remains and created a map indicating the related victims. Their lives spanned across a broad area covering all of New England and extending down to West Virginia, as well as parts of the upper Midwest and West Coast. In contrast, the unrelated middle child had spent most of her life further inland, likely in upstate New York, including regions near the northern borders of Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as northern Maine. While she had also lived in the Midwest and West Coast, she was not from the Bear Brook area. A crucial breakthrough came with the identification of the killer. In October 2016, DNA evidence confirmed that a man who had been imprisoned for murder in California and died in prison in 2010 was the father of an unrelated middle child. This man had lived under various aliases, which earned him the nickname the Chameleon. With this new information, investigators were eager to solve the case. They also updated police sketches of all 4 victims and hoped to finally expose their identities. A breakthrough was on the horizon, but to fully understand it, we must turn back the clock 30 years ago about the killer. In the late 20th century, a mysterious figure moved across the United States, blending into different communities while hiding his true identity. Known by many names, he was never truly revealed. In the late 1970s, a man known later as the Chameleon Killer began a deceptive journey that would leave a track of heartbreak and horror. This man, Terry Peder Rasmussen, moved to New Hampshire under the alias Bob Evans. The name was not just a new identity. It was a mask that allowed him to blend into the community and escape a violent past. But before we know about the heinous crimes of Rasmussen, let's first know who he was. Terry Peder Rasmussen was born on December 23, 1943, in Denver, Colorado. He grew up in Arizona and attended North High School in Phoenix, until he dropped out in his sophomore year in 1960. In 1961, he enlisted in the United States Navy, where he trained as an electrician and served until his discharge in 1967. In 1968, Rasmussen married and raised his wife and 4 children in Phoenix and Redwood City, California. However, his family later reported that he was physically abusive, with incidents including burning one of his sons with cigarette butts. His wife left him in 1975, taking the children after he was arrested for aggravated assault. The family last saw him around December 1975 or 1976. Rasmussen lived in several states, including Arizona, Colorado, California, Idaho, Virginia, and Hawaii, and eventually settled in New Hampshire in the late 1970s. Now that you have some background on Rasmussen, let's explore his criminal activities. As he was involved in several serious offenses and used multiple aliases, which made it difficult for law enforcement to track him. There are compelling connections between him and the Bear Brook murders. Was he connected to the Bear Brook murders? Did investigators have found the convicted killer? To know that, let's know about his disguise. Rasmussen found work at the Wambeck Mill and presented himself as an ordinary man. He was charming and friendly and quickly integrated into the community. But underneath this appearance was a dark nature that would be revealed over time. He began to travel with women and children and established relationships that would inescapably end in tragedy. One of the first victims of this pattern was Denise Baudin, a young mother who vanished in November 1981 from Manchester, New Hampshire. At the time, she was last seen with her 6-month-old daughter, Lisa.
Just reopened within the past 20 or so minutes, Ben, but Manchester police, with the assistance of the FBI, were here at this home in New Hampshire, where that missing woman last lived, as you mentioned, 36 years ago. Denise Baudin's disappearance being called suspicious by police. She was 23 years old.
The circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Denise were troubling. Denise disappeared shortly after Thanksgiving in 1981. A time typically filled with family gatherings and gratitude. Instead of enjoying this season, Denise likely faced a terrifying reality. She was last seen with her 6-month-old daughter, and her family initially didn't report her missing, thinking she had simply left town due to financial troubles. This delay in reporting her disappearance would have profound consequences. Rasmussen had a history of violence against women and children, and he was the main suspect in her case. He managed to blend into communities while hiding his dark past, which helped him avoid capture for years. Denise's case highlighted the severe impact of domestic violence and the challenges of missing person investigations. Without her body, authorities struggled to find solid evidence, which made it hard for her family to get closure. Denise was never seen again, but Rasmussen showed up in California 4 years later using the name Curtis Kimball. He kept Lisa with him and pretended to be her father. Again, this deception allowed him to maintain control and conceal his criminal activities. In 1985, he was arrested in Cypress, California, under the alias Curtis Kimball, for driving under the influence while endangering a child. He was arrested for drunk driving and child endangerment, but skipped court and left Lisa with an elderly couple at a trailer park. Following his arrest, he failed to appear in court and assumed yet another alias, Gordon Jensen. In 1986, it was under this name that he abandoned little Lisa in an RV park in Scotts Valley, California. The locations of Rasmussen remained unclear for the next decade, but in December 1999, he reappeared in California under the name Larry Vanner in a new relationship with chemist Unsolved Jun, who was 42 at that time. Later, it was revealed by the investigators that on New Year's Eve 1999, Elaine Ramos, who was Unsolved's cousin, hosted a party at her California home. Elaine was happy when Unsolved Jun brought a date with her under the name of Larry Vanner. Both families had immigrated from Korea, and Yoon-soon had often struggled with dating. However, Elaine felt uneasy when she met Larry Vanner. He was older, had a messy appearance, and had poor hygiene, though his blue eyes were striking. Vanner claimed to be a retired Army colonel, but became defensive when Elaine asked about his work. As time went on, Yoon-soon started distancing herself from her family and said they didn't want her to be happy. Vanner moved in with Yoon-soon, and they had a backyard wedding in 2001, which Elaine wasn't invited to. However, in the summer of 2002, Yoon-soon didn't call or show up for a planned trip with Renee Rose, who was a close friend of hers. When Renee reached out, she only got excuses from Vanner, who said Yoon-soon was with her sick mother or didn't want to talk. Worried, Renee threatened Vanner with calling the police if he didn't respect their friendship. She then followed through and reported to the police that Yoon-soon was missing. Detective Rox Grunheed began investigating. Initially, the police just wanted to confirm the safety of Yoon-soon, but they became suspicious when Vanner's story kept changing. Their concerns grew when police took fingerprints of Vanner, which revealed his true identity as Curtis Kimball. A search of his home revealed the dismembered body of Yoon-soon, which was hidden under cat litter. In 2003, Rasmussen was arrested, pleaded guilty to murder, and was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison under the name Kimball. To abandon Lisa was a turning point in Rasmussen's criminal life. Luckily, she was taken in by an elderly couple named Richard and Catherine Decker. The Deckers noticed that Lisa was thin and neglected, and they grew increasingly concerned about her well-being. Gordon Jensen said that Lisa's mother had died and acted like a sad single parent. He often cried to the Deckers for sympathy. While they felt sorry for him, they couldn't overlook the signs of neglect in Lisa. The Deckers proposed that their adult daughter and her husband, who struggled to have children, wanted to adopt Lisa. They agreed to a trial adoption and hoped to provide her with a stable home. However, during this time away from Gordon, the Deckers noticed even more alarming signs of abuse. Lisa told them about the mistreatment she had faced from Rasmussen. While the details are limited, it's clear she endured serious trauma. The Deckers eventually reported their concerns to the police, but by then, Gordon Jensen had vanished and left no trace behind. A fingerprint lifted from his abandoned vehicle eventually matched with Curtis Kimball, the man previously arrested for drunk driving with Lisa in the car. However, this lead turned out to be a dead end, as there were no concrete identity documents linked to that name either. Every time one of his identities was discovered, another layer of deception appeared. This talent for changing identities earned him the nickname the Chameleon Killer. In 1988, the police fortunately tracked down Curtis Kimball after he was arrested in San Luis Obispo, California, for stealing a car. At that time, he was living under the name Gerald Mockerman. Once again, his fingerprints confirmed his identity as Curtis Kimball, a man wanted for child molestation and abandonment. In 1989, Kimball accepted a plea deal for the child abandonment charges, which allowed other charges to be dropped. This meant that important information about the true identity of Lisa remained buried. Authorities were concerned that Lisa might have been kidnapped, as there was no evidence confirming that she was the biological daughter of Kimball. Although a blood sample had been taken from Lisa, the paternity test was never completed, and no blood sample was taken from Kimball. Some speculate that the plea deal effectively closed the case and led to it being forgotten. Authorities tested Rasmussen's DNA to determine if Lisa was his biological daughter. When the results showed she wasn't, he refused to reveal her true identity. At 22, Lisa was shocked to find out that her name wasn't really Lisa, and that the man she called her father wasn't her biological dad. In 2003, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department launched an investigation to find the biological family of Lisa. However, without the cooperation of Rasmussen, the search went nowhere, and Detective Peter Headley developed a new approach to solve this mystery years later. As the investigation progressed, the identity search for Lisa went cold for many years. Kimball, who was then imprisoned for the murder of Yoon Soon Jun, refused to provide any information about Lisa's origins. It wasn't until a decade later that Detective Headley took over the case. After exploring several dead ends, he encouraged Lisa to submit her DNA to a genealogy website. This step opened doors as they connected with distant relatives online. However, these relatives were not close enough to provide useful information about the biological parents of Lisa. Desperate for answers, Headley contacted a not-for-profit organization called DNAadoption.com, which specializes in helping adopted children find their biological families. This was where he met Barbara Raventer, who was a genealogy expert who began studying the subject as a hobby and had developed a reputation in the field. Together with Headley and a growing number of volunteers, including some distant relatives of Lisa, Raventer followed the branches of the family tree of Lisa. They carefully asked potential relatives to take DNA tests until they finally exposed the truth. This effort took over a year, required about 100 volunteers, and consumed approximately 10,000 hours of work. Eventually, they revealed the name of Lisa's mother. Initial searches in police databases suggested that this woman didn't exist. However, this was a result of her being inactive in voting and driving records for years and had gone missing in 1981. Through discussions with relatives who remembered Lisa, they discovered that her birth name was Dawn Beaudin. Her mother, Denise Beaudin, had disappeared in 1981, along with her baby and a boyfriend who went by the name Robert or Bob Evans. This name was yet another alias used by Rasmussen, who had also used Curtis Kimball and Gordon Jensen. While it remains uncertain whether Kimball was directly responsible for the disappearance of Denise, the violent history he had with women and children raises significant suspicions. Now aware of her past, Lisa requested privacy as attention on Kimball's crimes increased. Reports confirmed that she was married, had 3 children, and was living a happy life. If it weren't for the friendship of Lisa with the Deckers, she might not have survived. When 5-year-old Lisa was asked about siblings, she mentioned having siblings who died after eating grass and mushrooms while camping. It's unclear if these siblings were real, but her disturbing comment raises the possibility that there could be more victims missing. In a press conference in 2017, Jeff Strelzin, who was a prosecutor from the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, announced a groundbreaking discovery.
This case is in a backwards mode. Usually we start with the identity of our victims, learn the identity of our killer. We have a lot of information about our killer now, and we're hoping that leads us to our victims.
He stated the man responsible for murder of Yoon Soon Jun and the abandonment of 5-year-old Lisa was also the biological father of a middle child found in the Bear Brook case, which was still unidentified. Investigators knew that Denise Beaudin went missing from New Hampshire in 1981, and the first barrel of Bear Brook victims was discovered in 1985. While DNA tests ruled Denise out as an adult victim, the link between Denise Beaudin and Rasmussen led to additional DNA tests confirming that he was the biological father of the middle child. As Kimball passed away in prison in 2010, so he could not be interrogated, but more connections between him and the Bear Brook murders emerged with time. Barbara Raventer not only revealed the birth name of Lisa, but also used her genealogy skills to identify the Chameleon killer. Her work helped solve cold cases using DNA from unidentified victims. While some genealogy sites protect data, JetMatch allows law enforcement access. Although the Chameleon killer never uploaded his DNA, many of his relatives had uploaded their data. Remarkably, Raventer identified him in just 10 hours. Known by various aliases, he had 4 children, and a DNA test from one confirmed his identity over 30 years after the first barrel was found. In 1999, the younger half-brother of Sarah, who had never met her, made a post on Ancestry.com in hopes of finding her. Sarah was born in Hawaiian Gardens, California, while her dad was serving in the Marines. In October 2018, Rebecca Heath, who was a librarian and amateur detective, came across that post while investigating the Bear Brook victims. Her discovery set off a chain of events that would lead to significant breakthroughs in the case.
Just go through missing family members' websites, but they're not actually registered as missing. And I tried to find any matches that would line up with the timeline that came out from Bob Evans.
Rebecca learned that Sarah's mother, Marlice Honeychurch, had an older daughter from her first marriage, and their ages matched those of 3 victims found at Bear Brook. A relative mentioned that Marlice had married a man named Rasmussen, which made Rebecca increasingly confident about the connection. She shared her discoveries with Detective Peter Headley. On June 6, 2019, investigators in New Hampshire held a press conference to disclose the identities of 3 victims. They confirmed that Marlice Honeychurch was born in 1954 and was the mother of Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, who was born in 1971, and Sarah Lynn McWaters was born in 1977. All 3 had vanished from La Puente, California, around Thanksgiving 1978, while Marlice was involved with Rasmussen. After a disagreement with her mother, Marlice left home and never reached out to her family again. It is believed that she adopted the alias Elizabeth Evans for legal purposes in 1980. Marlice Honeychurch was estimated to be between 23 and 33 years old at the time of her death. Standing between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 7 inches tall, she had curly or wavy brown hair. Her dental records showed significant work, which included several fillings and 3 extractions, and highlighted her past medical care. Marlice married Marie's father in June 1971 but divorced in 1974. She then married Sarah's father in September 1974, but they had separated by the time she started dating Rasmussen. The children spent some time with their fathers, but Marlice eventually regained custody. By October 1978, Sarah's father was dating someone else, and Sarah was likely living with her mother. The 3 girls found with her were believed to share similar heritage, possibly including Native American roots, and they had light complexions. Marie Vaughn had light brown wavy hair, a crooked front tooth, and a gap between her teeth. Notably, she had 2 earrings in each ear and showed symptoms of pneumonia at the time of her death. The middle child, who remains unidentified, had brown hair, stood about 3 feet 8 inches tall, and also had a gap between her front teeth. An overbite was likely noticeable, and she may have suffered from anemia. The organization involved even released an updated facial reconstruction of her. Lastly, Sarah McWaters had long blonde or light brown hair and was about 2 feet 1 inch to 2 feet 6 inches tall. Like her siblings, she also had a gap between her front teeth. They have not yet identified the child's mother or determined if she is still alive. In February 2020, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and New Hampshire State Police released a new representation of the 4th victim. In 2021, investigators found that the mother likely had relatives in Pearl River County, Mississippi. The following year, they discovered she was probably a descendant of Thomas Deadhorse Mitchell, who was born in 1836 and would be the child's 5th or 6th great-grandfather. Sadly, it's thought that all 4 victims were killed before 1981, as Rasmussen was known to have left New Hampshire after that. In November 2019, a funeral was held for Marlice and Marie in Allenstown, where they received a new headstone inscribed with their names. Family members from both sides attended to honor their memory. Sarah was laid to rest in Connecticut, closer to her father's family, as the community came together to remember the lives that ended too soon. By June 2022, WMUR-TV released a documentary that focused on the Bear Brook case, particularly highlighting efforts to identify Rasmussen's biological daughter. The documentary aimed to raise awareness and gather more information about the ongoing investigation. In October 2024, the DNA Doe Project, a non-profit organization dedicated to solving cold cases, announced its plans to use advanced genetic genealogy techniques to help identify Rasmussen's daughter. This initiative marked a significant step forward in the search for answers in this complex case. The Bear Brook case highlights the lasting impact of violence and deception. It reminds us of the importance of community awareness. By sharing these stories, we honor the victims and encourage others to provide information. As we seek justice for those harmed by Rasmussen, we must remember the human stories behind the headlines. The lives of Marlies, Marie, Sarah, and the unnamed child deserve recognition and compassion in our mission for justice.